Hello, my name's Charlie Winston, and this is my podcast called As We Are, which is inspired by my most recent album, As I Am. It's discussions with people who interest me and inspire me. Some of those people you may know, but others you may never have heard of. But that's not the point, you see, because I'm simply interested in people. So, without further ado, I shall let you discover this episode. Take me as I am. The following conversation is with an old friend of mine called Thomas Peter. He is a photojournalist working for the global news agency Reuters, which has had him following Angela Merkel for 5 years in Germany, plus capturing moments such as the 2019 Hong Kong riots, the outbreak of COVID in China, and the war in Ukraine. Tom and I lived together in London in the years 1998 to 2004, very formative years for two boys making their tracks in the big wide world. Consequently, I regard him as one of my closest friends. You know, the kind of friend with whom time never seems to pass. Each time we talk, no matter how many years it's been, we hardly even get to the question, "How are you?" It's just a continuation of where we left off. At 18 years old, with a mod-style haircut, he came to London with nothing but a bass guitar, a camera and a few clothes. My friend and fellow band member at the time approached him in Covent Garden and said, "You look like Nick Drake." Tom hardly spoke a word of English, but from the next day onwards, he was taking photos of our band rehearsals, gigs and press photos. Several months later, he moved into my apartment and the rest is history. Thomas taught me how to be an autodidact. I know few people who work as hard as him or who would dare to go to some of the places he's been. From very little, he has become a highly respected name in the field of photojournalism, winning a Pulitzer Prize with his team. As his wife put it, it's only the creme de la creme of top photographers who get chosen to follow such a huge story as the war in Ukraine. A video journalist herself, I believe every word. Here is my conversation with Thomas Peter. Okay, so here we are. Tom, how are you?
Hey, Charlie. Good to be with you. I'm well. I've had a quiet day, and it's evening here in Beijing.
Nice. Well, it's good to see you. It's been it's not been too long. We saw each other recently, but we've known each other now about 25 years, I think, since we lived together in London for a good period of time, and they were great memories. But we've both gone our own ways, and you, being a photojournalist, have been around the world, and it's fascinating all the places you've been. I mean, from when we lived in London, you then went to, you came from Germany in Mainz, and then you lived in London for about 7 or 8 years. Did you? Or was it
7 years? Yeah, 7 years.
And then after you'd finished your studies with Russian and photography, in fact,
No, I studied Russian literature and history.
Not photography at all.
There was a year I studied photography, but I quit that because it was a rubbish course, and I decided to not complete that one and just focus on literature and history, which was very useful later on.
Because then you went to Russia, and you then. Did you get the job in Reuters in Russia, or
I did? Yeah, that's where I started
That's
my career.
how you got posted.
No, I didn't get posted there. I went to Russia without a job and made my contacts in the photography scene there. And at some point, there was an opening at Reuters in Russia, and I applied and got the job. That's I got my start in photojournalism as a paid photojournalist in Russia.
Yeah, right. And I'm just gonna glide through your life since then, just to give an example, give a kind of patchwork of where you've been since then. Predominantly, you stayed in Russia for, I think it was around 5 years that you were in Russia. Am I correct? And then
permanently. Yeah.
Right, and then you came back to Berlin, and you were there for 5 years.
Yeah, correct.
And then you went to Tokyo.
Yes.
And you were there for 2 years?
About 2 years, yeah.
And then happily you then went to Beijing.
Well, my boss at the time asked me if I wanted to swap with the photographer who was our Beijing photographer at the time, and I did. It's been an interesting move. We'll probably get into this later. China is a very unique country, and it has an influence on the mind because of its authoritarian system.
Well, I guess also as a Westerner, you're seeing it through that lens, if you'll excuse the pun.
Well, I mean, Western or no, it's more that having grown up in a free society makes it very hard to live in a non-free society, and some people adapt better to that than others, and I do struggle with the sort of restrictions that come with life in a dictatorship, I guess, which are always somehow present.
But what's interesting about your story is that you've always, to me, looked like someone. Well, actually, I know you well. When you look like someone who likes to be an alien in a way, in an environment which is not always welcoming, but it's where a lot of the stories are.
Yeah, it's I've always liked being an outsider to a certain extent, especially for work, because that gives you a unique perspective. It's not the only perspective that makes good photography. A lot of good work is done by people who are actually very much on the inside of the story they photograph. But I, having chosen the path of a foreign correspondent, automatically, kind of always look more from the outside in. However, I had to realize after so many years abroad that there's a price you pay for being constantly an outsider.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not just going to a place where I am an alien for 2 weeks to shoot a story. I actually live here. And in some places I've lived that weren't my native country, I managed to make a home because I, made a connection with people, and society was something that suited my character. And other places like this one, it's very much not possible for me to become part of the society, because it's just built on ideas that I just cannot agree with. So that makes it much harder to be. So I stay an outsider in China, very much so, yeah.
Right. So you're actually not you don't particularly want to stay there right now for much longer.
I mean, there's no future for a healthy life in a country where you feel constantly alienated.
Yeah.
It's okay for work, but after 6 years, there's a certain amount of burnout.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's actually, it's probably worth mentioning that when I last saw you with your wife, and I had to ask you, what's your position now? Like, where are you at in terms of your career as a photographer? And it was your wife who sort of pointed out the fact that you'd just been in the Ukraine earlier this year shooting the war there, and it is only a very few handful of, as she put it, the cream of the crop of photographers that would get chosen to go and shoot that kind of thing. So you are actually kind of at the top of your game in a way after all these years in terms of being a photojournalist. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm confident to be able to shoot any story that's thrown at me, which I suppose makes me, puts me into the, experienced in the higher ranking of experienced photojournalists. And I'm very much a photographer who thinks about every single story and every single picture I shoot, which is something that automatically, through a lot of work and hours you put in, translates to pictures that stand out. I mean, I leave the judging of my work to other people, but what I can say is that I feel confident in being able to handle difficult assignments.
So what is it? Give me an example of a difficult assignment. Like what would be, of course, in every job we do, there's some jobs which are easy and there's some sort of jobs are really hard. So what would be the way you describe a really hard assignment What would make it hard?
So one of the most challenging aspects is the finding a rapport with the people you photograph, and that can be easy if the people you tell a story about want you to be there, which is the case in Ukraine. Ukrainians very much want their story to be told, which makes it easier to work with people there. Of course, given the circumstances, it's dangerous and hard, and there's a certain element of there's always grief and despair surrounding it. But by and large, they want you to be there, which makes it easier to work with them. Very challenging are situations and societies that do not want you to be there, or they're fatigued about it. And to give you one example, it's quite a while back when Russia was building stadiums to for its Olympic Games in 2013. I think it was the Winter Games in Russia. I think they were either in the winter of 2014, I think. And so I went a few months before the start of the Olympics to do stories about the locals struggling with the whole building projects, because the government didn't really, took a lot of care, or they didn't really care too much about the locals, paying the price for the building of those big venues. And when I got there, I found people who were so fed up with everything that they just didn't want to talk to any journalist, that didn't see a point in telling me their story and showing me what happened. You had people whose houses had caved in because landslides, were created by massive building projects on top of a hill, or by like big sinkholes appeared because in other areas the groundwater was taken out. So I met these locals, and it took a lot of work before I took the first picture to make them understand that there is a point in still telling their story, even though they think everything's lost. So stories like those are challenging, but it's a challenge that I like.
Because it's kind of social hard. Challenge in a way. In a way, you're sort of. I mean, one of many other challenges. Yeah. You're having to win people's trust.
Exactly. Yeah, and you only do that as a human being. So that's why you got to be a human being first, and then a photographer. And you don't always succeed. Sometimes they just don't like you, and they will never be convinced that it makes sense to work together. But oftentimes you can, and when that works, you feel you've achieved something.
Have you ever been in a situation, and I'm going to use the word limbo, have you ever been in a situation when you're in limbo and you're between thinking, I've got something here, but it's dangerous, and I kind of need to get out as well, but there's possibly something that's I can get, you're between two that crossroads of being
right, yeah.
When you're in, I mean, I don't know if it's like being in a dangerous situation or just in the situation where you're. Well, I mean, learning how to win people's trust. I could imagine that you're faced with a lot of anger or emotions. Basically, is what I'm saying. And is there a moment where you feel like you could get it, but you just gotta, if you push too hard, you get the wrong result?
Yes. Trying to think of like an example. I mean, one example, the word limbo, I don't know how that fits. But there was
between being
story.
Heaven and hell is what I'm saying. Between something really good and really dangerous, and you're neither.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing: it's like if there's a sense of danger and you feel, I tend to err on the side of security.
Yeah.
So if if the danger seems to become, too overwhelming, then I just get out of there, because before it's too late, well, when it's too late, it's too late. So that's just like, there's often no wiggle room when it's a dangerous situation, as in, people can just like get angry and snap like that, and then it's too late. So you gotta have your antennas up. Or in Ukraine, when you hear shelling coming closer, you don't linger, you just get out of there.
Right.
So danger is something you got to take seriously when you feel it. But to go back to this situation where I had to convince people to work with me, there was this one woman whose house was basically almost cracked in half. Because the ground had given away, and I got to her house, and she was so in distress that she never actually changed out of her bathrobe in the morning because she was just so apathetic about her life. After her entire life savings that were in the house were basically just like gone down the hill almost, and I tried to convince her to show me around, to tell me her story, and to let me photograph her, and she kept saying like, I don't care anymore, I don't want, just leave me alone, all that. And I was like, let's just have a cup of tea, and I sort of sat her down, we had a cup of tea and took the pressure off in trying to convince her, and then that made her agree to work with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's sort of it.
It's giving that sort of element of humanity.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't come across as greedy, right? If they feel you there just for the picture, just for the story, and lose sight of them as human beings, then you're not doing yourself a favor as a human being, and you are certainly not paying them the respect that it deserves.
Do you see greedy photographers? Sorry.
Yeah, you see it a lot, like say in Kiev or Kharkiv, when people were seeking shelter in the metro stations, you had 2,000 people sleep at the height of people using metro shelters as metro stations as bomb shelters. You had at the height of that time, you had like 2,000 people crammed into the metro stations, and they would create little personal spaces with mattresses and little tents and curtains. And you would come in and ask them for pictures, and you would always see something. There's always certain pictures that like really, stimulate you as a photographer. It's like someone holding a baby, or someone playing with a dog, or certain colors, certain shapes, interesting characters. And there are photographers who just lose sight of the fact that they are dealing with human beings who sadly, because of circumstances, have their personal life turned into public space, turned in, from the inside to the outside. And you do see that, right? And among colleagues, we often call them back and say like, hey mate, just like, be a human. Because what it takes is you introduce yourself, you talk to them, you see how they feel, and you can sense pretty quickly if they're up for a picture or not, and if they see a point in having that picture taken or not. And you might sometimes not get the picture you really want, but then you go like, so what? There's an infinite amount of pictures out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just need to keep working on them.
And your role is like you're opening people's eyes to things that would not be seen otherwise. There's my song, Open My Eyes. And so that's something that's what you do. That's what you do for a job. You open people's eyes to...
But it sounds to something that's happening that they can't see for themselves. That is true, but it sounds easier than it is. Because what we most this day and age battle with is the huge amount, the inflation of pictures that's around all of us. So taking a picture, any sort of picture that might contain the information you want to convey, will not open anyone's eyes if that picture isn't somehow shaped and framed and crafted in a way that it does open someone's eyes. So, just like a good song needs to be worked and crafted for hours and hours and hours to actually strike a certain chord in the listener's mind. Does a photograph really to achieve anything need to perform these very sort of these functions, right?
So tell me, right? I mean, I know what it is to craft a song. Maybe not. Not other non-songwriting people know what that means, but I don't know what it is to craft a photograph, because we, as you said, we live in this world where everyone's a photographer now.
Yeah.
With their phones. So tell me what that means to craft a photo and with a frame of reference that people can understand as a story within a story narrative.
Well, if I had the formula, I'd probably not tell you because it would be my secret. But the truth is, there isn't a formula. There is an intuition as a photographer that you develop over many years of doing this, and you get to a situation when you can feel the picture. And it might be there in its vicinity, and vicinity on a spatial dimension or on a temporal dimension.
Yeah.
Meaning that some elements still have to come into place. A person still has to appear in that one window, or like a car still has to come around the corner with its headlights on, or temporal where the light isn't right yet. You can see that this will be at a certain time of the day, have just the right lighting to make that picture work. But what it is exactly that makes a picture work is different for each situation, and you somehow start to feel it, you know?
No, but that's so interesting, because it's kind of the same answer as how do you write a good song, really.
Right.
In the end. Yeah. So it really is. It's
know.
just about intuition. But I guess the craft actually is doing it again and again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
Until your intuition is really strong about the tiny mechanical moves you need to make in order to get to that final goal.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know yourself what it is that makes that song or the picture perfect. But it's not quite there yet. The difference in photography and in photojournalism is that you can't tamper with the material, which, of course, you as a musician, you have all the creative freedom to change any element in your songwriting to make it work. So for us, it's the elements you bring into play are patience, anticipation. Sometimes it's a split second, but you kind of feel it's coming and you're waiting for it. Or as I said earlier, like the human contact to work with people so that they let you into their lives, which then will make the picture happen, because they agree to let them photograph.
Yeah, exactly.
Like to let you observe them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you talked about everyone being their own photographers, and I guess that would mean also that people's eyes are changing as well, in the same way that now there's a lot of things that we can't get away with in music because people's way to consume music has changed. Do you think that's changed, the way people consume images?
You mean...
Well, I mean, we live in an... sorry to quote my song, but algorithms. We live in the world of algorithms where, it's not only changed the way we do things, the way we deliver our craft to people, but it's also the way people receive the craft as well.
Right.
And in your case, it's like, so in terms of images, we live in a world surrounded by images every day, including our own personal archive of images. So do you think that's changing the way that we receive the kind of images from yourself and people in your field, or change the way that you think about making images?
I think it probably has, if you talk about platforms that are governed by algorithms. And that's social media, which used to be a great place for photography before the algorithms took over. The problem with those algorithms is I do have a big problem with them, is that they show you stuff that the algorithm has figured out will provide you with the largest amount of pleasure. Yeah, that immediate trigger of pleasure, which keeps you engage with that platform. That's not photojournalism. It will show you. It's funny videos. It's somehow, things that the algorithm believes you like, and it will not come up with great photojournalism. And that's the annoying part, because the algorithm goes for the lowest sort of
common denominator.
Yes. I mean, of course, it can be very smart. If you look at TikTok, it figures out within, 20 minutes kind of your interests, and it will feed you with those videos, right? But those interests are like your pleasure interests. And photojournalism and the content is stuff you often don't want to see. And you probably wouldn't choose to see if it wasn't for someone telling you that it's important to look at this. And that's why when it comes to photojournalism, I so much more in support of the human element that used to be the curator of photojournalism, which is magazine editors, curators in galleries, because they would point you into directions of subject matter, or of certain styles, and there's an evolution in styles, and you can see where that goes, and this is all stuff that's outside of your knowledge unless you are steeped in modern photography. But that's where the curator comes in. That's where, say, to go away from photography, magazine editors, you buy a magazine you like, and every week this editor will, or the group of editors will have chosen articles that are important, and you might not know they're important. And they don't just show you stuff that you like, and they know that you like it, because that makes you buy the keep buying the magazine, right? I mean, that's Yellow Press. That's what Yellow Press used to do.
Yeah.
So, with algorithms as a provider of like pleasure impulses, I struggle, and it has overtaken, say, Instagram. Instagram for me used to be a stream of content that I somehow created by following a certain set of content providers, and they were all photographers, and that was a way for me to keep up with colleagues' work from around the world and stuff I admired, and I would always see what they do. And then, I don't know, a few months back, they changed the whole thing to more of a TikTok-like experience.
Yeah.
And now I get to see cars, which I don't care about.
Yeah, and
or
crashes,
and football scenes, and stuff like that. And every now and then there's a photojournalism piece among that stuff, and I go like, well, you've destroyed it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because I've just decided to delete all of the people I follow, not because I don't want to follow those people. There was a lot of accounts that I enjoyed following, but I realized that the majority of my time, when I sat down to have a look at, I took these little moments during the day to look at what the people I'm following sharing, it was 50% not those people. It was just a ton of stuff that I didn't want to see, I didn't care about.
Right.
And I thought to myself, this is now becoming a real waste of my time. Yeah. And I realized, if I want to find out what people are doing, I could just go directly to their account. I don't have to be subscribed to their page, and right. So of course it takes a little bit more effort, but in the long run, I spend a lot less time on stuff that I don't care about, because we're in a world of distraction now. So you think, oh, I'd like to see that, and then you find 10 minutes later you've been looking at everything but that thing. It's very easy.
I mean, it's an attention economy. For them, the engagement time is what matters. Yeah. For their advertising revenue, so they try to make you glued to the screen, and whatever it takes. So they don't care about you. They care about the page impressions they get.
So, but for you, it's changed also, I imagined. Like the way, I remember you telling me once what happens when you get a great photo, you can actually upload it immediately, and it could be within 5 or 10 minutes. It could be on a main news outlet.
It could be seconds, like on certain events like the Olympics or important football games or like a big election, the final picture of the winner being announced. We send the picture straight from the camera. So the camera is then connected to the internet. Choose a picture at the back of the camera, press send, goes to the editor. They write a quick caption, crop if necessary, and then it goes out to the wire. And then for those important stories, it will be picked up immediately by the big newspapers. So that process can be as short as 5 seconds. Because some of these newspapers actually have automated pickup systems from the wire. So they take like the first picture of the deciding goal in the World Cup. And then bang, it's on their front page, and there you go.
That's crazy.
Before you put your camera down, like your pictures all over the world.
And have you seen that happen? I mean, do you ever follow what you send out to see if it gets goes out there?
So, I'm not a sports photographer. I do shoot sports every now and then, and I do the Olympics, but I'm not a specialized sports photographer. So that is. That particular speed thing, not so much, hasn't happened for me so much as with, let's say, sports photographers.
Yeah.
But I do, of course, follow, I do check when I cover important events where that stuff ends up, because it's just interesting to see what impact you made and how you did in comparison to your competition. So, yeah, you do a fair amount of Googling your own name.
But do you think do you think that's a good thing? I mean, do you think it's good that you can? I mean, it's quite exciting, really, that you can make it. It's like making a track and then putting it up and then it's out in the world on Spotify, etc., etc. Do you think does that feel like a really good aspect of the algorithmic world we live in?
Well, that's not an algorithm, that's human beings making a choice, like starting with me, who decides which picture to send. And the ultimate choice is made by the editor, the picture editor of the newspaper to decide this is the one. So this is still, however, even though it's technically aided, but it's still a human conversation, so to speak.
However, those things wouldn't be possible if there were not algorithms on the internet in place and on your camera. I mean, your camera is full of algorithms, I imagine. I mean, not the algorithms that follow what you do and learning ones, but methodical algorithms which are like to get this result. For example, in a picture, when you get picture programming and stuff like that, or focus programming, I guess there's there's algorithms in place to get to that point. It's not always like a social media aspect. It's also just a methodical thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for that we should define what we mean by algorithm. So there's the kind of machine learning algorithm that figures out which is what we're dealing with in social media most of the time. The cameras we use don't have. We use them mostly in manual mode, so we set our own exposure. So that's all set by the photographer.
Yeah.
What has been improving massively in the last, 5, maybe even only 3 years is facial recognition focus, which is algorithm aided. Yeah. So I rarely use it, but in some occasions it's actually quite useful to have your camera decide where the face of the subject is. That only works if you have like one person in the picture, or like, and then it will actually find the eyes, and it will make sure that the focus is like razor sharp on the eyes.
Yeah.
So that's an aid that is useful, and that's an algorithm as well. It's an AI that has learned to recognize faces in an environment.
Yeah.
I don't mind that sort of algorithm because I still have agency over whether I turn it on or off, or when to use it, and if it works for me or not.
Yeah.
So I'm not against the technology of machine learning, if I have a say in how it affects my life or my work. So do you think that's fine? But
sorry, go on.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, like, on a slightly different subject, I wanted to ask a question based on the song Unconscious about what, and especially about what drives us to do things. And what I've learned, what that song talks about very much is I had to learn, and I'm still learning, how I'm programmed, from a young age. It's kind of through my education, through my parenting, through the kind of friends that I chose when I was younger, and sometimes through hereditary, things that are passed on, which you have no control over. There's a very murky, blurry line between, what you learn and what you already have. But it all kind of contributes to what drives me and what drives my thought processes. And I'm wondering, what drives you to do what you do? What do you think drove you to have this, to take on this role in life?
I think it's there are more conscious decisions. So I haven't explored my subconscious, to be honest, too much, because it hasn't really gotten in the way. So, character traits I have, and I wouldn't know I had them if it wasn't for my wife pointing them out to me, which is a very important thing, which we can get into in a minute, is that, the closest people to you are very, very important, whether it's your partner, your best friends, in telling you who you are outside of your own thinking of who you are, right? That's a very important sort of correcting thing to have in life. So, but like outside of these things, the decisions to choose the career and the life I live were conscious, but what drove me to be a kind of wandering citizen of the world, some people would call it, I don't know, to be honest. I felt trapped in the small German town I grew up in, and getting out of there was always an urge. Where exactly that came from, I don't know, but I never really questioned it because it worked in my favor. And probably that's what many people do, as long as whatever the subconscious makes you do, if it doesn't get in the way, you just go along with it.
Was there a moment when you remember finding something that was that you could call your passion with photography, where what was it that, there's something about being the observer that you enjoyed and being able to capture someone's story? Like what was... What's going on there?
It's always been a challenge to... I'm not the most extroverted person who automatically like embraces every human being that comes my way, and building that rapport with people to earn their trust so you can take pictures and work together with them is actually hard work that doesn't come naturally necessarily every day. I guess I kind of enjoyed the challenge of that.
Yeah.
Because of the reward at the end of it, which was the picture. I don't know. It's like, I guess it's a little bit of you hear often writers say how hard and torturous it is to write. And you wonder, why do you still write if it's that hard and difficult? It's because they love, at the end of the day, the thing of having written something. And I love the photograph. And most things that are really exciting in life are actually very difficult to get. And I just found the strength within myself to face that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I hear a song, or a piece of music, I kind of analyze it and listen to the certain instruments, listen to the production, listen to the construction of the arc, of the arrangement, and listen to the kind of general overall feeling as well that it gives me. What happens, all these things for many people, these are unconscious things for a lot of people because they don't think about them on a regular basis. So what are those unconscious things that you can see in a picture that most people might not see or feel even?
The space behind the camera, probably. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I can. I mean, often I don't know, of course, but I can sense the moment that came before that picture was taken.
Wow.
Because of my own experience. And
that's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, every now and then there's a picture where you go like, how, like, I have no idea, right? So that's sort of these magic photos exist as well. But the longer you do this job, you kind of understand how it's done, which doesn't take away from the quality of the picture and the respect for the photographer. But the sheen comes off a little bit. Because you understand the craft that went into making that picture. So, which is okay. I think you probably get the same with an amazing song you hear, and you know exactly how they achieved that particular vibe or sounds.
Or you can also hear the kind of things that are cliched or people do all the time, the easy things, and thinks it's magic, and for you it's not necessarily magic. Like, well, yeah, anyone can do that actually, but I mean, and you can hear beyond that or see beyond that. But that is so interesting that you can often feel behind the camera. I mean, I've never thought about that we look at a picture, you look at like the inverse or literally the subconscious of the picture.
Yeah, I still look at the picture and I admire it if I like it, but I then also understand probably a fair bit more about it than non-professional photographers.
Can you give me an idea of? Can you just give me? You might not be able to, but could you try to explain what you see when you see that? What happens in your head? If you see a photo and then you understand what's going on behind the camera, what are you seeing there? I can't even imagine it.
Right. I mean, it very much depends on what I see in the picture, but like often you see like, man, that person had balls, or man, that person had really an amazing rapport with the subject in the picture.
Yeah.
Like, it's often actually in portraits when you see people photographed in a portrait setting, and not so much in studios, but more like documentary style portraits where you feel that you can see the subject in the most sort of intimate moment.
Yeah.
And of course, the photographer was still there, often less than a meter away from that person. And it just speaks to the emotional intelligence of that photographer that went into making this photograph. And you know, I can imagine the time that was spent with it, or like in portrait photography, often there's a certain amount of giving directions that go into it. And I like thinking about this because it's inspiring, you know.
Yeah.
For
you just reminded me of when I showed you the front cover of my album, and your reaction was like really strange. Not strange for me, but I was really blown away because I just see a picture of myself, and I mean, much of my album, calling it As I Am, it's all about self-acceptance. It's all about trying to get rid of the facade or the costume, you know, and just put myself right there on the picture as I am. And that's quite difficult because to me it seems boring. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's people for whom it's boring as well. They'll see that front cover and go, oh, that's just a picture of Charlie Winston. But you know, for me, it's more than boring. It's also like, I don't know if I can actually be that naked, and it must be boring to look at. But then you looked at it, and your reaction was, as soon as it came up on screen, you went, wow, and you actually moved backwards, And tip of the hat to Jan Velters as well for taking the photo. But I was like, wow, what's going on in your head there? And then you started asking me loads of questions about how the photo was taken. And I was so kind of blown away. Like, I really realized, oh yeah, there's a whole other way of thinking that a photographer goes through to see a photo. So what was going through your head when you saw that photo?
Well, because I could see that the photographer was he didn't go into the shoot to take a complicated or like a photograph of Charlie Winston with a complicated light setup and tried sort of to trick the viewer into admiring this, image with great shadows and, highlights and all that. No, this photographer was trying to capture something of you that looked beyond your facial features, right? Where you're as an onlooker, you kind of like travel into your eyes and you go like, what's in there? But also it's this sort of almost like this reflection of yourself, because you also look at the viewer, right? You look straight at you. So in a way, it's when we are talking now and I watch you listening to me, I can see you reflected, or in your face. I can see your interest in what I'm saying reflected in your face, right? And that's sort of similar with this picture, where you look at this face kind of looking back at you, and that creates a certain magic conversation, right? And to achieve that as a photographer is something that takes a visual intelligence.
I like that word, visual intelligence. That's nice.
Yeah.
And emotional. Yeah. You said emotional intelligence earlier on as well. I think we're kind of trying to capture both in a way, aren't we? I mean, in music, I'm trying to capture a sonic intelligence and emotional intelligence at the same time. Yeah. Do you think?
And you can't pin it down, right? You can't just, you there isn't a single word that says why this picture works the way it does, right? That is, yeah.
So, tell me about your wife, because you said that it's a really important person in your life.
And, absolutely.
And it sounds like she plays a role when you said you don't really know yourself as well as you have come to learn about yourself since she's started highlighting certain things. But so I guess we could say, that she's changing some of your perspectives, or allowing you to learn things about yourself that.
Because no one.
Go on.
No one's as honest to you as the person who's closest to you, if you allow that person, a person, to be close to you. And if you don't do that, you stay in your solipsist bubble, where the only person that tells you who you are is yourself, and that's never a reliable narrator, right? You will be quite a dick to everyone around you, because you've never realized what you do to other people, because to yourself it seems okay. That's just the way it has to be, because that's the way you react. And Meg is like,
she's a photographer as well, right?
She's a video journalist. So we share a very similar lifestyle, and we talk a lot about stories. She also lives in China, of course, and then we cover similar stories. And
but she's from Singapore.
She's Singaporean Japanese, so different cultures, which adds another dimension of interesting perspective, really, to our relationship. And
does she change or shift your paradigms? Have you shifted your frame of reference or perspective on life since that you've been sharing this life together, meaning like as journalists living in foreign countries but being together on that path has...
Yeah, I'd be a complete mess without her. Because she has brought to my life many things that never really worked. But I found ways to patch that up, right?
Can you give me an example?
It's, it's sort of like, I'm a very rational person in life and the way I tackle questions, and she's not. And having that perspective just gives me obviously a depth without which my life would be much poorer, right? And I'd probably lack the sense of completeness that's basically catches up with you for that kind of stuff. Like you think you the strongest person in the world on your own, but the letter will be in the mail at some point.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And it's that constant checking by someone else who does that, not for selfish reasons, but for reasons of togetherness and love.
Can you think of a moment, either in your relationship or in your life, where you've been really confronted by the kind of dead end of your own beliefs, where you've really had to sort of think differently? Has there been a moment in your life, either professionally or even on an emotional level, where you had to really rethink things and go, okay, this is not working, I'm going to reapproach this?
Yeah. The things I can't identify a single moment like that, because I have this constant incremental thing going on where I think through my life and my work, that I haven't hit a wall in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, except for in some ways, after 6 years living in a country where I feel where I am not free, because this is not a free country, that has taken a mental toll which I probably wouldn't be able to get through without her, without the constant without constantly talking it through, right? And trying to figure out and trying to find strategies to stay on the healthy side of life, because the mind in those situations tends to sort of like go into self-destructive mode, right?
Yeah, we should probably say that you've lived in China through the coronavirus, while also at the same time following the story of where it began, where you were, having and being under intense scrutiny about that, and having to be incredibly diligent about your own sort of whereabouts. Just thinking of the story of when you told me when you were going to the place where it began, and you had jumping taxis and all sorts. And I mean, you've been through some pretty crazy scenarios. Can you just say about one of those stories that you've had to live through?
Yeah. So China's always been hard for foreign journalists, but the coronavirus definitely has added, many more layers of obstruction and surveillance. And when the coronavirus was starting to infect people, and in Wuhan in around February 2019, when it really became an epidemic at the time, it was still an epidemic before it went around the world. A colleague, Martin Pollard, and myself, we couldn't go into Wuhan anymore because it was locked down, and the surrounding province, Hubei, was locked down as well. So we decided to travel around the provincial border of Hubei to see how the corona lockdown and the virus and the fear that people had of it affected people's lives. So we went to like small towns, and we saw, like, of course, people in people being scared and in horror, really. But we couldn't really. It was hard to tell the story because the police was constantly on our back, and they would detain us by the roadside, hold us for hours. They would call us into the police station. They would lock us into our hotel, and they would tail us the entire time. And that's sort of their methods. They're scared of foreign correspondents telling anything that's beyond their control, that they rather just shut down any activity of ours, no matter what it is. And especially when it comes to such nationally important stories as the coronavirus.
We often hear these stories of like journalists getting, particularly in Asia, like getting taken away and then put into cells, or
Well, I wouldn't say in Asia per se.
Yeah,
it is a massive continent, but China.
Let's say China, particularly.
Yeah, China is a very. It's one of the countries with one of the most restrictive media environments, and it's extremely hard here. And it has become much harder in recent years to get your story off the ground and
right.
tell the stories you feel are important. So there's a lot of like run and gun situations where you just like get into a village and you got a window of a few minutes or half an hour before the cops turn up and they just shut you down, and that's it.
Do you ever worry about getting taken away or anything like that as a journalist?
Not really. No, their approach is more passive aggressive. So they won't rough you up too much, but they just basically try to obstruct you and stop you from like reporting a story. Yeah.
Speaking of worry, when you're in the Ukraine, would Meg, your wife, be worried about you? What's the situation there regarding like worrying about each other in dangerous environments?
Yeah, I mean, of course she was worried because it was an active shooting war, and it's the biggest war we've had in Europe since World War II. And especially at the beginning, when we didn't really know how the situation would develop, I went in on this, I think the second day of the war. And initially we thought the Russians would just roll over the country and take over. And then, so we had no idea. So initially it was scary for all of us. But I promised her, and I did call her every evening and gave her updates. And she was following the news. And of course she understands that, I take precautions, my company takes precautions, and we are, as much as you can be experts in those situations, we do bring all knowledge to bear to make us as safe as possible in hostile environments. So as time went on, she increasingly understood that, and we both understood that the risk here is manageable.
Right.
No. So it was okay in the end.
What's the bravest thing we can do in a bad situation in life? What's the bravest thing? What is it to be brave? Is it to be sensible? Is it to be to take precautions? Do you think that's bravery, or is bravery going in and?
Well, I mean, taking precautions is just smart. That's brave is.
Do you think if someone says to you, "God, you're really brave going into a war zone," do you see that as being brave?
Not really, no. I see it as my job, and it's a job that comes with certain risks. But I think many other jobs do too, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, brave. It's a very. It's a very cinematic term,
That's true.
I find it hard to apply that to my life, because once you're there, you're just in work mode. You know, like you know the routine. You know how to take.
I guess this is also a part of the craft, isn't it? Is that you go in and you're familiar with certain protocols and means of staying or going. You know, should I stay or should I go?
Yeah, I mean, you your mind goes very sharp. So you in those situations, you're very quick in making decisions, and you thinking in many dimensions at the same time. You know, like while you go forward in your car, you think how you're gonna get back. You know, while you go left, you think, can I escape to the right? It's that multidimensional thinking, and your mind is always running to be have a plan B and stuff. So that keeps you. That, you know, that's sort of a professional work.
It's a little bit like being on stage, I guess. When I'm on stage, I'm just like highly tuned in to that present moment.
Exactly.
And everything that's going on in that while I'm put on that podium to do my thing. And
some people would probably think you're bloody brave to step onto a stage in front of thousands of people and sing a song. But for you, that's your moment. That's work, and that's what you've trained for many years, and that's in many ways why you do what you do. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Thomas, given everything you sort of said about your life and the work that you do, like, and everything that you see as a human being, but also as a photographer, what do you think? What do you see in the world at the moment? Well, how do you see the world? What's your outlook on the world? Like, what are we? This podcast is called As We Are. So what is this world that you see us in?
I mean, I am an optimist, where I do tend to see the possibility of people pulling into the right direction by and large as a community, but I do see a new danger which we haven't found a remedy for, which is the possibility of controlling many minds with information that is just no longer rooted in facts and truth. And that is, I mean, we've had it in the past, right? When superstition and rumors would cause like mayhem and, you know, create mob violence in, you know.
Yeah, propaganda. And propaganda, like, but also.
Yeah, but like now propaganda has become so fine-tuned to the individual minds through the devices we carry that it has just taken on such a more potent energy, which we, I think, probably don't fully understand how to incorporate. It will never go away, but how to incorporate that into a healthy fabric of society, right? I do believe that things will probably have to get worse before they get better, before we understand how to contain that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what happened in the US on January the 6th, where so many people were just following a false message and attacked the seat of their own government, and still months later believe that they did the right thing, is scary, right? How these untruths can take such a deep hold of people's minds, and it's so hard to undo it, even by giving them clear evidence of the contrary, and that's scary. And I don't think, and I've seen it, especially in Russia, or rather when Russia overtook Crimea in 2014 and they annexed it, how they managed through a persistent campaign of disinformation to get the Russian-speaking Crimean population onto their side beforehand, so they were just basically ready when the Russian soldiers appeared. So it's scary to watch because you cannot argue with these people, and we haven't found an answer yet how to contain that danger, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
like
Absolutely. So you do feel ultimately a sense of optimism about.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I enjoy reading a lot of history books, and if you do that, you read about so many gruesome massacres that while reading that, you sometimes think like, how did we survive as a human species if we are capable of mass slaughter on that scale?
Yeah,
But
so
we
true.
have.
So true.
Somehow we always prevailed the survival as a group.
We're very persistent. Humanity is a very persistent species, or life is very persistent. Life finds a way to continue. And but I totally agree with you. I mean, I've gotten into history just in the last few years or 5 years. I never really was much of a history reader, but since I've started learning about history, even recently, just going to the center of France, and we went to see these caves in the Ardèche, and seeing this prehistoric art from 36,000 years ago just really blew my mind. And just like I was like, wow, we really have been here for some time. But okay, so finally, as I end all my podcasts, I want to ask you I'm going to mention the song Letter from My Future Self. And I want to ask you what your future self, around the age of 80 or 90, that old man would be writing a letter to Thomas Peter today in your little or big apartment in Beijing. I'm not sure how big it is, but and you'd receive that letter today.
My little life in my big apartment.
Yeah. What would old Thomas Peter say to present day Thomas Peter? What will he say? Sorry, not would he?
Yeah. What will he say? He'll probably say, "Don't stop. Don't give up. Keep on going on the path you go, and just don't stop." Because I think that every experience you make is, whether it's good or bad, is worth more than the regrets you would later have in life for not having done that because you were too scared, or you were too lazy, or you were too much intimidated. So yeah, it's that thing where you just got to keep at it,
I've got to ask you in response to that, do you hold yourself back now? I mean, if he's giving you that advice, old Tom is giving young Tom this advice, do you hold yourself back? You mentioned that.
I try not to. Of course, I try not to. But there's always periods in everyone's life where you're not as productive as you would like to be, and there's always circumstances that stand in the way, and that's fine. I don't think you have to aspire to be the perfectionist or the 16-hour working maniac who wants to build an empire of some sort. That's not necessarily it. The boredom you experience is just as important as the bursts of energy and activity that follow. So, it's a much like,
gradual,
lower.
lower.
The latitude of your activity doesn't have to be a steep incline all the time, right?
Yeah,
it's just just don't recede into complacency and a meaningless routine. Right.
So he's a happy man. He's still out there. Old Thomas Peter, writing this letter, and he's saying, "Keep going.
Yeah. Keep going.
You've got a good thing going.
Eventually, exactly, because that old man will say, like, keep going. eventually you will get to where I am now.
Excellent.
The old man looking back.
Thanks, Tom.
Of course. Pleasure to talk to you, Charlie.
You too.
I hope to see you soon, actually, once this whole travel restriction craziness is over.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be nice. We're going to work on that.
We will. Okay. Good night, Charlie.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.